Hi again then guys, and welcome to another replica style build for Gran Turismo 6, and this particular replica is of one of BMW's newer style performance M cars, kind of a renaissance for their performance engines. It was one of their earliest models to move the M performance vehicle into turbocharging rather than naturally aspirated engines. Some people didn't like that as much, which is understandable. I'm personally a big fan of naturally aspirated performance cars, but the benefits that it gave the car are really undeniable. It's a great little performance car, and as far as in-game performance and specs, you can make a pretty nice little replica of the BMW 1M. As you can see here from the visuals, there are some things that you can't do, of course. We can't get those massive, almost homologation style wheel arches that the actual car has. It's actually just as wide as a BMW M3, but it's about 4 inches shorter, which gives you perfect dimensions to make it fun around the track. It's a very well proportioned car. It's got a chunky appearance, quite a muscular little car. On the game, we can't quite get it to look that aggressive, but as you can see, it looks pretty good. You've got the same kind of iconic orange that car has, the rims look pretty similar, and even the optional body kit at least does the car some justice. So, first of all, we will go over to check out the visual changes that I've done to this particular car, then of course to the mechanical side of things, and finally we'll take it out to a track to see if it's fun, if it's fast, and maybe even competitive for racing as well. Now, first of all, for the bodywork in particular on this model, you do have a couple of options. You've got two body kits in particular. One gives you kind of a flattened off chin splitter on the front. Personally, I don't think that looks quite as good. You could go for the standard kit. I've opted for the Type A. As you can see, it just gives it a little bit more of an aggressive style, and at least that contributes a little bit more to looking like a 1M. Of course, that can only go so far, and you do have to use your imagination a little bit. You do have the option of a flat floor, but I would not recommend it on this car. Not necessarily because it makes it too fast, but because it just doesn't look right. It's not a race car after all. As far as the rest, there are no optional extras. The rear wing isn't something that you have to change. As far as the rims, the BBS RE MGs, especially in the inch-up one, I would recommend, do look pretty similar, actually, to the real car's wheels. That kind of snowflake design, which is extremely popular. I haven't opted for any additional meters. You could fit those, of course, if you want to. I've just opted not to. As far as the colours of the car and the rims itself, well, first of all, for the brakes, they don't apply, so they're just the stock colour because of course it's a production based replica, so we haven't given it racing brakes, and as such you don't need to paint those. As far as the body though, as you can see, it is a metallic colour that we've gone for, and the particular colour is called Atomic Orange Metallic Tint Coat, and that actually comes from the Corvette ZR1 of the C6 generation, and it really does, I think at least, look like a pretty good homage to the actual orange on the real 1M. And as far as the rims, I've also gone for a metallic colour. You've kind of got a couple of options. You could of course leave it the stock colour, because the real 1M has a few options. You've got that kind of chrome but not quite chrome colour, and also some which are more of a dark grey. I've opted to replicate more that side of things, and I used a grey which I use on a lot of vehicles, which is X-Power Grey, which comes from MG. So that's it for the visuals. Pretty simple, but I think at least it gets pretty close, as far as we can at least, in-game to looking like an actual 1M. And of course the colour makes a big difference to that. So that's it for the visuals. What though about the performance? Now, straight off the bat, you can probably notice that this car's PP level is not rounded off in the way that I would usually have it. I would often try to have the car with a PP level of, say, 475 or 470 if possible. With this car, though, it seemed more appropriate to focus on the replica and the fun factor rather than just trying to make it good for seasonals or racing or that kind of thing. So if you want to build it to a PP level, you can of course do that, but this is purely for the replica, solely for that, with the PP of secondary importance. Now I've gone for Sport Soft tyres because of course you want it to feel like a street car, albeit a fast one. For the brakes, again, like with the tyres, you don't want it to feel too good. It's not a race car after all. As far as suspension, I've dropped the ride height to 120. That actually comes when you upgrade it to race suspension. Springs we've increased a little to 525 and 775. The dampers and anti-roll we've left on 3, which is still an increase over the stock. Camber and tow we've got neutral. I know some people like to have a little bit of camber, and if you want that, go ahead. It just doesn't necessarily need it. As far as the gearbox, well, actually we'll come back to that in a second. As far as the diff, first of all, I've opted for the lowest initial torque, the highest acceleration, and also the highest braking. And with those particular settings, as we'll talk about more in a second when we take it out to the track, the handling is, somewhat ironically, a little bit too good, because the real 1M, of course, is a fun, playful, kind of tail-happy vehicle. This, although you can certainly drift it, has a little bit too good of handling and of grip. So it depends what you want. You could mess around with that and try and make it worse, in effect, if you want it to be more tail-happy, but I'll leave that down to you. As with the brakes, we've left the clutch, flywheel, and prop shaft stock. As far as power, we've fitted an oil change, which is very important of course, and just the sports exhaust. That immediately gets you up to 335 horsepower, which is the real power of the car. And for the weight, we've got a stage 1 weight reduction, and then you want to give it a 107 kilo ballast, which brings you up to the real quoted weight of the car of 1495 kilos. And incidentally, I got all of these specs from BMW blog. They had some fantastic spec sheets with very detailed numbers for the vehicle overall, and also from that same spec source a weight split of 52-48 in favour of the front. So just put that ballast 25% towards the front of the car, as you can see there. And finally for the gearbox, again using the real ratios of the actual car, which is always nice to be able to do. You want an auto setting of 211, which sounds pretty high, but basically that's just the simplest way to be able to actually reach all of the individual ratios. And for those ratios, as I said, we're running the real numbers, 4.10, or 4.110 I should say, then 2315, 1542, 1179, 1 and 846, with a final drive of 3154. And those are the real specs of an actual 1M. So the question is, with the specs of a 1M, can it perform like one? Well, let's go to the track to find out. Now, around the track, as I kind of mentioned just now, this car's handling errs more on the side of being, ironically, a little bit too grippy. Now, if you want to change that, you can change around settings, in particular with the diff, as I mentioned, to make it a little bit more tail-happy, more inclined to drift. So it all depends on what you want from the car. Overall, though, being as we don't have an actual 1M, of course, on any Gran Turismo game currently, it's hard to have a point of reference, because we just don't have the real car. However, there are some other racing games which do have the BMW 1M, and having driven that car on those games, I can say that, of course, to a certain degree, it does feel like it. And overall, if you do decide to use this build to replicate the 1M, I hope you have a lot of fun with it. You could, of course, use it for racing if you round it off maybe to the PP level of 475, but either way, I hope you have fun with the car and potentially use it to race as well. And if you are new to the channel and you'd like to keep up with other builds like this, both replicas and customs, you can of course subscribe down below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.